So you want to learn more epistemology, but you don't know where to start. Well, I asked this professional epistemologist for his top 5 book recommendations for a complete beginner. This list is super helpful and we're about to reveal it, but there's more. You're also going to get what my guest considers the top 5 most influential books in epistemology and the top 3 most important historical works in epistemology. That's 13 books in all. Whether you're a complete beginner, intermediate, or advanced, when it comes to this topic, you're going to get a lot of value out of this video. We're starting right now. My guest is Dr. Andrew Moon, a professor of philosophy at Virginia Commonwealth University, and he's an expert when it comes to epistemology. Before launching into his book list, I asked him to define epistemology for us, and this is what he said.
Some people will just define epistemology as the study of knowledge or the study of what we can know. We could branch it out a little bit. Epistemology is the study of what we can rationally believe. So that might be a little bit more than what we know or what we can be justified in believing. What we care about is the nature of knowledge, nature of justification, and what are the conditions for us being able to know. Now, this is relevant for a channel like The Analytic Christian because a lot of your viewers will care about whether we can know that God exists or whether we could be justified in believing God exists. And to be able to answer that question, it helps if you know what justified belief is or what knowledge is.
Next, we got into his top 5 book recommendations for someone who is a complete beginner to epistemology, and here it is.
My first pick is the book I use to teach my upper level epistemology course at VCU. And the book is called Epistemology, and it's by Richard Feldman, who is a professor at University of Rochester. What I like about this book is he's very clear, he's thorough, he introduces each topic with a lot of examples. One downside of it that I'll just admit is that it has information up to about the year 2000, but still a lot of those issues are still issues that epistemologists are working on today. That's our book number 1. The next book is called Epistemology, 50 Puzzles, Paradoxes, and Thought Experiments, and it's by Kevin McCain. A lot of epistemology and philosophy is driven by examples and thought experiments. Like, suppose someone is in this situation, would they have knowledge or a mere belief? So, a great way to learn a lot of epistemology is just by learning a lot of the examples. And one thing that Kevin McCain does in this book is he has an introduction, he has the thought experiment or the example, and then he has some commentary about it on it, and he has some references for further work on that specific example. And one neat thing about this book is, unlike the previous book, it was published in 2022. So you have a lot of the examples that are relevant that have been discussed even up till now. Things that were published just a few years ago will also be in this book. And even if you don't read this book cover to cover, it's a good reference book. If you're wondering about what a Gettier case is or what a fake barn case is, then you can just check it. You can look in the table of contents and check out the book. Book number 3 is going to be a little more challenging, but I still think it's worth mentioning and having on my list. So it's called Epistemic Justification, and it's by 2 authors, Lawrence Bonjour and Ernest Souza. We actually worked through this book in a graduate seminar of mine when I was doing my doctoral work in philosophy and epistemology. One thing I like about this book, and I think what makes philosophy fun, is when it's in the form of a debate. So Bonjour and Souza are coming at epistemology from very different directions. Bonjour is what you call a classical foundationalist. And he thinks the only foundational knowledge we have is knowledge of our direct mental states, like our mental states. And from there, we might try to learn about the world. Souza takes a very different approach called a virtue epistemology approach. What's nice is you have these two going back and forth. And I find learning to be more fun this way in the form of a debate rather than just one author saying, here's this information, here's that information, here's that information. In this book, it's more like, this guy said that. What's the other guy going to say? Oh, boom, he got it. So it's a little bit more fun. Books number 4 and 5 are a little more connected to my own journey into epistemology. So book number 4 is called Word and Proper Function by Alvin Plantinga. A lot of your viewers for The Analytic Christian have read or are familiar with Alvin Plantinga's work, Knowledge and Christian Belief, and or even the longer book called Word to Christian Belief. And I noticed a lot of those people have not made the next step into digging deeper into planting as epistemology. When I was somewhere between sophomore and junior year, I was actually on a foreign study abroad trip in China, and we would be doing activities during the day. But I remember I couldn't wait until I got back in the evening where I'd have a bit of free time so that I could be reading more of this book. Planning is a very enjoyable writer. He has funny things along the way, but also a lot of really interesting things. But he has a chapter on how we can know through our memory or our perception, or how we can know through testimony. He has a chapter on knowledge through induction, knowledge through probability. What I like about this book is that it approaches knowledge from the perspective of a lot of our faculties, and you get a nice in-depth look and exploration of each one of them. So that would be my fourth book. The fifth book is called Warrant in Contemporary Epistemology: Essays in Honor of Planning's Theory of Knowledge. It's basically the set of really top-notch epistemologists: William Lightgen, Keith Lear, Lawrence Bodger, Ernie etc. And they're all responding to Plantinga's books on epistemology. And one thing that I liked is, once I knew Plantinga's religious epistemology and some of his general epistemology, then I was thinking, okay, what do all these other people think about it? And in the process, I was able to learn everybody else's epistemology from that perspective. Here's Lycan's view, here's Sosa's view, here's Bodger's view in the context of their attacks. Then the last chapter of the book is Planning responding to all of these people. It's in a debate format, and Planning's responses to everybody is really good as well. So I guess I would recommend these two books kind of as a pair.
Next, Dr. Moon gave what he considers to be the top 5 most influential books in epistemology today.
So this is a book from the 70s called Ignorance by Peter Unger. And it's a pretty powerful book in defense of skepticism, the view that we don't know anything. And this is what's influential, influenced a lot of people for years to come. This book by Timothy Williamson, Knowledge and Its Limits, was published in 2000. And I'd say maybe of all the books in this list, it's probably been the most influential. It started a movement within epistemology called the Knowledge First movement, where a lot of people wanted to understand knowledge in terms of justification. So to know something is to be justified in believing something in a certain way. Williamson flipped it. He said, no, knowledge is first, and we should understand what justified belief is in terms of knowledge. And then he went on and said, and we should understand all these other things in terms of knowledge first. So it was kind of like a paradigm shifter. One thing about this book is it's very difficult, and in some places very formal. He uses a lot of technical language and logical vocabulary. So it's not one I would recommend for anybody beginning in epistemology. This next book is called Knowledge and Lotteries by John Hawthorne. And it's just the idea, look, even though the probability that my ticket will lose is extremely high, I still don't know that my ticket will lose. From this, you can generate paradoxes about our knowledge in general. So this whole book is devoted to that puzzle, but it actually starts to influence other areas. Like you start to develop skeptical arguments from knowledge and lotteries. Knowledge in a Certain World. This book came out in 2009. Jeremy Fantle, Matthew McGrath. McGrath was one of my advisors. And this is one of the key books. I would say it's the best book I know of that was connected to this movement called pragmatic encroachment. The idea of pragmatic encroachment in epistemology is the idea that the higher the stakes are for you that a proposition is true, the harder it is to know that proposition. That book expands on that idea, and pragmatic encroachment has been like a huge point of debate that has been very influential in the last 10, 20 years. Lastly, this book by Keith Rose called The Case for Contextualism. The idea is, it seems like when we're in an ordinary context, we would just say, yeah, I know that I have hands, I have a bottle, and so forth. But then if we're talking about the matrix or being a rain in a vat, we're afraid to say that we know anything. One way that Keith Rose tries to get out of this is just to say the word knowledge, the word know, is context sensitive. We can know in some contexts, but not in others. And he develops a whole framework for this. Unlike the other, I'd say, unlike most of the books, I would say this might be the most clearly written. Keith Rose just really tries hard to be really careful about explaining everything in detail. So that's the good thing about this book. So those would be my 5 like most influential books, I would say in the last 20 years.
To finish up, Dr. Moon gave what he considers to be the top 3 most important historical works in epistemology. Here's his list.
Okay, historical books. Rene Descartes, Patience on First Philosophy. You could find this for free online. It's common to assign this in introductory philosophy classes, and it's kind of the beginning of a lot of the skeptical discussions. Descartes' book is kind of what probably has the most direct influence now, I would say. And it's pretty short. Next, David Hume, An Inquiry Concerning Human Understanding. So Descartes' Meditations is pretty clear. And I would say that about David Hume too. Also pretty clear. He's really trying to just lay out skeptical arguments in all sorts of areas. A lot of epistemology, even now, is just trying to respond to Hume's arguments. Some of your audience might know about Hume's arguments against miracles. I mean, Hume was just skeptical across the board about what we can know or justifiably believe. So that's David Hume. The last book is going to be Thomas Reid, Essays on the Intellectual Powers of Man. So Hume is like a skeptical, corrosive acid, but Thomas Reid is like a wonderful water hose. It just helps clean away a lot of Hume's skeptical arguments.
So now you know exactly which books to read to start learning more epistemology today. But you can actually start learning more right now for free. Just click this video where Dr. Moon applies epistemology to religious beliefs. Specifically, we discussed the question, how can you know that God exists?